So here we are, and this is my last platform talk as the clergy leader of the Riverdale Yonkers Society for Ethical Culture. I've really been honored to serve here. I have really loved the people. I've loved trying to revitalize a congregation from a, so to speak, near-death experience. My own metaphor for clergy leadership is the patchwork quilt. A March Piercy poem talks of her finding a quilt in a drawer in the attic, picking it up and stitching on it, and then putting it away for someone else to pick up later. Ethical culture professional clergy leadership is like that. None of us is a forever leader. We're human beings, and our terms of service are variable. Some serve 1 or 2 or 3 years, some for 55, and even then, rarely with the same community. So there are no permanent clergy leaders. We're all here for a time. And it's the same with members. We're part of a long succession of people, past, present, and we all hope future. Anyone who's been here more than a month or two likely realizes that this community changes, as do all communities. There may be nothing new under the sun, but part of what is nothing new is that things change. A generation passes away and another generation comes, even if we think of the organization, the community, as remaining the same. I'm a humanist, and to me, all of life is an interim process between birth and death. That's all we have, the time being. We began today with a couple of versions of a song, Turn, Turn, Turn. Some remember it as a Pete Seeger song, and others as a top 10 song by the Byrds. The words are from Ecclesiastes. It's part of Western culture. There's nothing new under the sun, though it will be sung differently by new artists and new generations, as were the two versions of it that we had today, one instrumental and one with Nina Simone. And really, it is nothing new as a thought, for the words are from a book that was written somewhere between 2,300 and 3,000 years ago, a book which contains no mention of a deity, except a tacked-on ending by a later editor. It focuses on human life, one of the oldest books we have contemplating the meaning of life. Bits and pieces of that book, often from the King James Version translation, have made their way into our culture. I'll repeat some of those lines that might be familiar. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. There is no new thing under the sun. That which is crooked cannot be made straight. For what hath man of all his labor, and of the vexations of his heart, wherein he has labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrow, and his travail grief. Yes, his heart takes no rest for the night. This is also vanity. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. A man hath no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry. And then there are these other famous words. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And so this book implied is life always. Less remembered is that this is followed with a question. What gain have workers from their toil? And this in a more modern translation. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so does the other. They all have the same breath, and humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knows whether the human spirit goes upwards and the spirit of animals goes downwards into the earth? And then the speaker in the book says, so I saw that there is nothing better than that all should enjoy their work, for that is our lot. Who can bring us to see what will be after? And more words that are echoed today as we look at some of the horrors in our world and ask if there's any way we can lessen them. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are practiced under the sun. Look, the tears of the oppressed, with no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors, there was power, with no one to comfort them. This is a book which claims internally to be written by a son of ancient Jerusalem's King David, which has been assumed to be Solomon. But the whole book is an exploration of what is the meaning of life. Lives of the wise and the foolish all end with death. So the only answer in this book is to enjoy what we have in each day: food, drink, work. Some later editor tacked on an ending about keeping God's commandments and God judging all of our deeds, probably because for its time, that book was a bit of departure from traditional religious views. And so somebody had to try and make it more religious. Now, if you try to read this book as part of God's unerring words to guide humanity, the book doesn't make much sense, and it's full of contradictions. It seems to deny the idea that God is good and has a purpose. There is no hope beyond the grave. If you read it, as I do, as an example from long ago of a human journey to try to understand life, then what seem like contradictions are merely a record of a very human effort to try to make sense of our lives. Like much of philosophy, different possibilities are offered, trying to make some sense of it all. This book has often been described as the earliest known humanist text in the history of humanity. It's in the voice of a single person. One clue that the ending was tacked on was that it shifted to the third person. It's about an urgent and sometimes frustrating search for meaning in our lives. And the conclusion that what meaning there is to be found in human living, not from some outside source or some hope in an unknown future. Our knowledge and wisdom are by necessity limited, and we might as well have some good humor about it. And we live on through our deeds. Well, I also look to a poet much closer to our time for where I differ from that author of Ecclesiastes. I don't happen to think that it's only eat and drink and be merry and work because we're going to die tomorrow. Like that ancient preacher, I agree that there is no given meaning to the universe. But unlike the ancient preacher, I don't find it that frustrating. There is still meaning that we can make in our experiences in those many interim moments the moments, the hours, the days between birth and death, and in how we affect those around us, near and far. The deeds we do in this life matter. The poet William Blake wrote of this sense of being in the middle, in the interim of every moment. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. To me, that's just so much more than just eat, drink, and make merry and work. To really appreciate what it is that is around us, to actively appreciate it. Not just eat, drink, and be merry and work, but appreciate those as we do them. Live in the moment, but also find ways to love the moment. And here's my real disagreement with Ecclesiastes, and that title actually translates to the preacher. The preacher sees an individual as alone in this world, having no impact on anyone but themselves. Toil and work, this preacher sees as worthwhile for oneself only. But we are not disconnected beings. And it's not true that what we do in the world has no lasting effect. When we do good, that effect can make a major change in someone's life. And when we hurt another person, the effect can last their lifetime. Our actions through the reactions in other people ripple past our lifetimes to the lifetime of another, and another, and another. Now, Ecclesiastes does come close almost to that point when it says, again, I saw all the oppressions that are practiced under the sun. Surely that is a call to do what we can to bring comfort, even knowing that we can't comfort everyone. Surely that's also a call to confront those with oppressive power and exercise comfort in ways that reduce oppressive power. The spirit of this time being is to recognize that we cannot help everyone, but that need not stop us from helping some. What we do in this life and what we do not do matters. It matters to others, not just to ourselves. Just as what others have done has made a difference in our lives and has made helpful things possible, and sometimes has established limits that are hurtful. But even Ecclesiastes seems to be open to that. That to everything there is a season passage, remember, ends with that question: what gain have workers from their toil? And I think that deserves our answer. What gain do we have from our behavior towards others, whether in work, in our families, in our friendships, in a community such as this? Perhaps none, except in how it affects others, how it ripples out. Eternity is not just in the palm of our own hand. It is also in how we affect others. It is not that life is meaningless, so don't do anything. It's that life is meaningless except by how we take what happens to us and what we do. And some of that will fail. So we do what we can, while we can, to our full power in every moment, in every day. Well, this is my last platform talk here. I will still be around much of the month, available to talk one-on-one by phone or by Zoom, if you contact me and we can set up a mutually agreeable time. Will I be back to talk here again? The future is open, but I'm not going to be back here with any regularity. You need the space and time to fully make your transition that you are trying to make. To help sustain myself and continue to do the work that I do in ethical culture and to work towards a world of compassion and peace, I'm going to be making some of my platform talks and future writings available by subscription. And I'm also going to be doing some workshops on Zoom and some in the Riverdale area. You're, of course, welcome to subscribe or attend. I'll also be doing some organizing work elsewhere as part of my commitment to building beloved community. That is right now only at the beginning stages, so you'll likely hear more if you subscribe to my newsletter, which you can find at revjoanlewis.com. In a few weeks, I lay down the patchwork quilt here and the work that I've done on it during the time I've been here. The same is true with Christian and Jay. The patchwork quilt of professional ethical culture clergy leadership is going into a drawer for a while. And if someone picks it up later, they will have their own style and contribute that to the quilt. The work of all of us who've gone before will always be part of that design. But the larger patchwork quilt of ethical culture is not going into a drawer. You are all still working on it in some way, or you could be. And it will only grow and develop if you work on it. Others before have influenced the pattern that you have to work with, and your work on it will influence how others work later. And now I'll turn it over to Christian.
Thank you, Joan. I found it difficult to think about what I would say today. I'm not like Joan. I don't have, how many years in the movement as the leader?
32.
32 years of experience. But what I kept coming back to was trying to think about what my life was like without ethical culture. I remember sitting in church services in Brooklyn and hearing things, some things that resonated, some things that troubled me, but having a lot of questions that I felt were never going to be answered. And I remember going to different services of different religious faiths, doing Ramadan while in college, observing Ramadan, struggling through classes in the morning because I couldn't get up early enough to eat the meal before the sunrise. And still enjoying the searching that came with that, but also remembering the lack of feeling like I had a home. And until that day when I walked in to a speech that my mentor was giving at the Philadelphia Ethical Society, and I said, oh, this feels right. And it felt right because I had experiences before that that had made me feel like this is the kind of community I wanted to be a part of. It was working with young people on Saturdays, leading them in service learning and watching them build relationships around trying to make the world a better place. And I said, I wish I had a community like that for me. And so when I went to the Philadelphia Ethical Society for the first time for a platform, I felt like I had found that place. But I think the last 3 years have done something, shifted something. It shifted the surety I had in the sense of what drew me to this tradition. And I think the tradition itself, the spaces, I've seen a lot of challenges. So this is a very crucial time, not just for Riverdale, but for the American Ethical Union as a whole. But if I can think about over the years of this, I think it's almost 10 years. It's been 10 years exactly, actually, since I went to my first FEST conference, Future of Ethical Societies for Young Adults. which I think in a way cemented me into to ethical culture, because I saw ways that uh, the diversity of ways that I could be involved, whether it was young adults or whether it was my slightly grayer population at Philadelphia Ethical Society. I remember I sort of can think about the significant things that I tried and experienced in my life because of ethical culture and because I felt like I had a foundation of something that I believed. But one of the main things I think it did was it helped me see and understand writing better, stories better, whether that's documentaries, whether those are novels. And there's a platform I gave a few years ago about the way Toni Morrison taught me about humanism. And so I feel like there was this conversation that I had between me exploring ethical culture as a tradition, dreaming of maybe becoming a leader, and then also this conversation that Toni Morrison was having through her novels about what it means to be human, what it means to be free. And I can't help but think of Beloved, which I consider my Bible. Um, it is the thing I turn to when I need help framing answers to difficult questions. And I think about Baby Sug and The Clearing, and how the first time I heard someone read the portion about loving your body, loving yourself, and I felt like, oh, like this is something I need to hear. This is something that I need to read. And when I finally read the book, it wasn't that part that moved me the most, but rather later in the book when there's a moment when the clearing is brought to someone in need. So while we first get introduced to the clearing as a space that is in a spot, and the leader is Baby Suggs, and the community have this relationship with that space, we find out that the clearing is not a place, but it's our commitment to supporting one another, to being in relationship, to offering the full human experience, the full possibilities, whether it's crying, whether it's laughing, whether it's learning. And so it's in that way that I feel like when conversations about ethical culture come up about should there be a leader, should we have a building, does it have to look a certain kind of way? And I think those questions miss the point of what ethical culture, in my mind, is supposed to be about, which is relationships. Where can we have the relationships that allow us to fully experience what it means to be here, what it means to pursue justice, what it means to continually try to grow? And so in that way, I hope we can take on the spirit of the clearing, of that place where people who, for the oppressions, for the countless oppressions that we see in the world, people who that have a hard time loving their skin, loving their hands, loving their mouths, that we offer them a place, a space to do that in relationships. So thank you for having me these last few months. I have enjoyed, I've always thought Riverdale was one of my favorite places to come, and I could experiment with the weird things that I try to do on a Sunday basis. And I've appreciated the openness to sharing with me. And I hope some of those things stick or encourage further thought and exploration. Whether it's about the relationships in your life, or whether it's the relationships that you want to build but feel like there's a barrier to building, or whether there's questions or needs about what is this, the deep longings in this community, and that you all find a way for each other to still explore that with each other in the coming year. Thank you.